Vietnam, 1968. The jungle never truly sleeps, and neither do the soldiers trapped inside it. Private James Walker pressed himself flat against the red Vietnamese soil, fingers tight around his M16, listening to the sounds of men moving in the darkness beyond the wire. There were hundreds of them. Maybe more. The fire base was small, 32 American soldiers holding a patch of hill that nobody back home had ever heard of. Intelligence reported a Viet Cong battalion was closing in from 3 sides. The radio crackled with desperate messages. Ammunition was running low. And the jungle kept breathing. Then the commanding officer grabbed the radio and screamed 2 words that made every man on that hill look up at the sky: "Spooky's coming." Nobody who heard those words for the first time ever forgot the moment. And nobody who saw what came next ever looked at the night sky the same way again. High above the jungle, invisible except for the red blinking of navigation lights, an old propeller plane began to circle. It moved slowly, almost lazily, banking into a wide turn over the fire base. From the ground it looked harmless. Then it opened up. A solid beam of red fire reached down from the sky and touched the earth. Not a burst. Not a spray. A continuous, unbroken pillar of flame, as if God himself had reached a glowing finger down from the clouds and pressed it into the jungle floor. The sound it made was not the crackle of rifles or the boom of cannons. It was a roar. A deep, mechanical roar, like the growl of a dragon. The soldiers on the hill began to cheer. They called it Puff the Magic Dragon. The aircraft was the AC-47 Spooky gunship, a converted World War I-era Douglas C-47 transport plane that the United States Air Force had transformed into one of the most devastatingly effective close air support weapons in history. On its left side, 3 GAU-2 miniguns had been mounted, each one capable of firing 6,000 rounds per minute. All 3 together, 18,000 rounds per minute. 300 rounds every single second. The pilot flew the aircraft in a constant left-hand bank, using a special sight to keep the stream of fire fixed on a single point on the ground. As long as Puff circled, nothing in that circle could survive. The math was simple and terrifying. Every square yard of a football field-sized area could receive 1 round within seconds of the gun's opening fire. James Walker described it years later, sitting in a veterans hall in Ohio, his hands wrapped around a cup of coffee that had gone cold. "I've seen a lot of things in my life," he said quietly. "But I've never seen anything like that." The red line just hung there. In the air. Between the plane and the ground. Like it was solid. Like you could climb it. And the sound, he continued, staring at nothing. It wasn't like machine gun fire. It wasn't rat-tat-tat. It was more like a buzz. A horrible, low buzz. The kind of sound you feel in your chest before you hear it with your ears. And then the screaming started from the jungle. And then it stopped. That night, the fire base held. When dawn broke, patrols moved out into the tree line and found what Puff had left behind. Walker didn't talk about what they found for 30 years. When he finally did, he chose his words carefully. "War is already the worst thing there is," he said. But that was something else. That was industrial. That was erasure. The AC-47 program had begun in 1964 when Air Force planners realized that conventional jet aircraft were too fast and too limited in loiter time to provide the kind of sustained fire support that ground troops needed during the long, grinding night battles of Vietnam. A slow propeller plane that could circle for hours, that was what the infantry needed. The first proposal was almost laughed out of the room. Generals didn't want slow, old transport planes. They wanted jets. Speed. Power. But the test results were undeniable. In engagement after engagement, the slow-moving Spooky saved American and South Vietnamese lives that jets simply couldn't reach in time. By 1965, AC-47s were flying combat missions. By 1966, they were legendary. The name came naturally. Soldiers who watched the red fire stream down from the darkness above began calling it Puff the Magic Dragon, a reference to the popular 1963 Peter, Paul and Mary folk song, but twisted into something darker, something that captured the strange, almost supernatural appearance of the aircraft at work. There was nothing magical about what it did. But there was something deeply unreal about watching it, this quiet thing circling high above, raining fire with mechanical perfection, indifferent as a machine, lethal as anything that had ever flown. For the Viet Cong and North Vietnamese army soldiers on the ground, the AC-47 was a source of genuine terror. It could arrive within minutes of a distress call. It could stay on station for hours. It fired so fast that by the time the sound of the first shot reached you, hundreds more had already arrived. There was no cover that helped. There was no direction to run that was safe while Puff circled above. Former NVA soldiers interviewed after the war described hearing the call sign "Spooky" come over captured radio equipment and watching entire companies of men freeze, not from orders, but from fear. Between 1965 and 1969, AC-47 Spooky gunships flew thousands of combat missions over Vietnam. They were credited with defending dozens of fire bases that would otherwise have been overrun. They supported special forces camps deep in enemy territory. They flew in weather that grounded everything else. They flew at night when the enemy moved most freely. The crews who flew them were a special breed. Flying slow and low over enemy territory in a lumbering propeller plane, orbiting the same patch of jungle for hours, they were easy targets for ground fire, and they knew it. Dozens of AC-47s were hit. Several were shot down. The crews understood the risk and flew anyway, because the men on the ground were calling for help. James Walker knew one of those crews. He met the pilot of the Spooky that saved his fire base 3 months after that night, at a base in Da Nang. The pilot was a quiet man from Georgia named Lieutenant Colonel Raymond Fulton. Walker tried to thank him. "He just looked at me," Walker recalled, "and said, 'I was just doing circles. Your guys did the hard part.' He walked away before I could say anything else." The AC-47 was eventually replaced by more advanced gunships, the AC-119 Shadow and the legendary AC-130 Spectre, which still flies today in updated form. But for the men who were there in those early, desperate years of the Vietnam War, nothing replaced Puff. When the jungle closed in and the radio went quiet and the ammunition ran low and the darkness seemed to press down with the weight of everything that wanted to kill you, the sight of that red beam descending from the sky meant one thing: you were going to live through the night. James Walker died in 2019 at the age of 74. His obituary mentioned his service in Vietnam. It mentioned his family and his work as a school teacher for 30 years. It did not mention Puff the Magic Dragon. But those who knew him said that on certain nights, quiet nights, when the sky was clear, he would sometimes step outside and look up. Not at anything in particular. Just up. Into the dark.